Is he a cat? Is he a dog? Who knows? He's green, he runs, and he collects gems. This is Tearaway Thomas. Tearaway No, not that. Tearaway Thomas is an Amiga game released in 1992 and the first game that I ever played. And I will start off by saying that I think this game is amazing, and I'm not just claiming that from nostalgia. The basic aim for each level is to collect enough gems and then jump through to the exit in classic 2D platforming goodness. Sounds simple enough, but in this game your enemy is the timer. Every level has a set amount of gems that you must collect and a specified time limit. If the time runs out, then you'll still continue the level as normal, but as a result you will lose a life. There are enemies in this game, and touching them will temporarily stun you, and also knock up a few seconds from the timer. Now you can't kill any enemies in this game, but you can jump off them, which will give you a few more points. Now I don't know if this is a glitch or not, but to actually bounce off the enemy successfully, you need to hold down the jump button as you land on them, otherwise they'll just stun you. One common comparison with Tearaway Thomas is Sonic the Hedgehog. I would argue that Thomas does have a higher focus on speed than Sonic does, despite the fact that Sonic probably can run faster overall. But ultimately, they're two different games, and I don't think a comparison is really that fair. Speaking of speed, I think one very interesting thing about Tearaway Thomas is how the speed is implemented. He doesn't accelerate or decelerate, he travels at one constant speed. Also, the jumping physics are quick, but large enough to feel fluid. And as controls go in general, this game has them down pretty well, I would say. As I mentioned before, bouncing off enemies is one way to get points. And points may not seem like a big deal, but in this game they really are, and I'll go into that later. The game is split into 5 different worlds, each world containing 8 different stages. The stage 4 in every world contains a secret item that, if collected, will send you to the bonus Fruit 'em Up stage after completing that level. A bonus Fruit 'em Up stage is where you have to collect as many fruit as you can within the time limit in order to rack up even more points. At the end of every world there is a bonus challenge level, where if you manage to complete the challenge you get an extra life. But it doesn't seem to actually do anything, so I suppose they're bugged? With the exception of the final challenge, you don't actually have to beat these challenges. World 1 is Woodland, where all the trees have only a few branches, which are at perfect right angles, and they are still happy regardless of the fact that they don't even have a single leaf between them. It's a good introductory world. The trees accommodate for almost all of the platforms, and the later stages you'll find yourself needing to jump from tree to tree. As a kid, stage 6 really gave me the most trouble, as it relies very heavily on ropes in rather high and insecure places. But there's one thing that's always confused me about Woodland, and it's this Tweety bird in stage 3. It's the only one of its kind, and it looks so radically different from the rest. And that would make sense for a boss, but this guy isn't even a threat, so what's it doing there? World 2 is Thailand, which is made out of Lego, and this world tends to rely more on landing on smaller platforms and fitting through smaller gaps. It also introduces enemies that can fire bullets. Thailand is much more rigid and structured than Woodland is, though personally, I prefer Woodland. Then we have Ghostland, my favourite world in the game. Ghostland follows the haunted house setting and these levels tend to be rather well structured but not so rigid like Thailand. Ghostland also introduces some new items such as the clock that adds to the timer and the wings that allow you to glide. Other items that I've not yet mentioned include an invincibility shield, a hamburger that lets you run faster, teleporters, invisible teleporters, extra lives, and star skips. More on those later. Ghostland also has really fitting music. The game has fitting music in general, but I can't help but feel that the music for Ghostland would work very well in an episode of Scooby-Doo, which is why it works so well for Ghostland. Also, don't try jumping on the ghosts, it won't work. World 4 is Iceland, which basically feels like a reskin of Woodland. But unlike Woodland, Iceland has several hills and floating platforms around. It also introduces ice, which, as you can guess, causes you to slide around. Given all this and the annoying balloon guys that drop bombs, this is my least favourite world. Also, the gems trapped in ice cubes aren't very interesting either. You have to jump on them to crack them open. And the final world is Futureland, and I do quite like this world, but it's certainly hard. The amount of careful jumping and fast reaction speed that you need is pretty high. This world also has flying enemies that can travel outside of a set pattern through their diagonal movements, and poles you need to climb that also have lasers on them. Not nice. Futureland also tends to have platforms that are directly above you that you can't jump through. Quite a nuisance. What is neat is that even within the same world, many of the stages can still stand out as unique, other than the different sky colours. For example, whilst most of Woodland is about running through all the trees, there's a couple of stages which are about climbing one big tree. There are also levels that focus on moving platforms, teleporters, or even more open-spaced exploration. Some of the level names are rather punny too. Fast things first, up, up and tearaway. Some of these are so punny, it's like falling off a log. As a child, I didn't really catch on to any of these, but now as an adult, I can fully understand names like Rope and Glory, Would-be Honey Thief, The Long Oh. So, points. Points. Why do points matter? Every gem you collect gives you points. 50 for yellows and 100 for purples. Silver gems offer you 500 points, and the gigantic silver gems offer you a whopping 2,500 points. And as you may have guessed, the silver gems are rarer than the yellows and the purples. Any gem collected after you reach the threshold to complete the level will give you double points, and completing a level with every gem within a single life will give you a perfect bonus of 10,000 points. So why is this so important? Well, every 50,000 points gives you an extra life. Sure, it's common in these games for points to transfer into lives, but in Tearaway Thomas you will need them. The early levels are relatively easy to rack up points, whereas the later stages will eat away at your lives. Of course, it's very possible to get good enough at the game to the point where you don't need these extra lives, but I strongly recommend it. And that brings me back to the star skip. Throughout the game, there are these yellow stars called star skips. If you collect a star skip, you will skip ahead a few levels. Sounds really good, but by doing so you also skip out on opportunities to gather up points. You really have to compare the benefits of the points gained to the cost of the potential lives lost. In general, the early stages are not to be skipped, as they don't pose a threat at all, whereas the later levels, they do pose a threat, and skipping them if you can is advised. One thing that makes this game so great is that it accommodates for so many skill levels. I'm going to go through and explain the different stages of how the player's skill develops as they play, from novice to master. Now this may get a bit complicated, so pay attention. So somebody who is completely new to the game, what would they do? They would simply practice the early stages, as that would be as far as they could get. If they were to ever get bored of repeating these same levels, they could collect a star skip. This could be used to either try a wider variety of levels, or to at least allow them to practice the later levels that they are stuck on. And by later levels, I just mean levels after the first couple. And as they get better, they can still choose different ways to progress through the game. They can either choose to skip ahead and practice the levels that they are up to, or they can stay behind and practice perfecting the levels that they can beat. One simple way to do this is to go for the perfect bonus. This will help gather up points and therefore lives to make them better at the game. And even if they have perfected getting a perfect bonus on a level, they can still practice the different ways of utilising the way in which points are doubled after the gem threshold is reached. This would include, for example, withholding the silver gems until later on in the level so that those points can double and therefore more points overall. The player can, in essence, practice the easier stages to become even better and try out different things on those easier stages to make the overall game easier for themselves. So the player has some freedom in how they wish to practice and progress through the game. Somebody who is capable of getting more points in the early stages will consequently have more opportunities to practice getting through the later stages. And given all this, the player can eventually get to the point where they can complete the game. But it doesn't end there. Even further practice will allow these people to get through the game without having to rely on gathering points in the early stages. As a result, star skips in the early levels once again become feasible. This means that these players could become even more skilled by getting through the game faster and relying on less lives to do so. Alternatively, they may wish to go for completing the game without using any star skips at all. Now this is insanely hard because there are a few levels in Iceland that are extremely difficult, and I would perhaps argue that the hardest level in the game is in that set. Those levels are skippable, so you can complete the game without them, but because they're so hard, because they're so difficult, people just naturally collect the star skip. Now what I find so strange about this is that these levels in particular are so unplayed that it's as if they're secret levels, they're bonus, extra hard difficulty levels. I don't know about you, but I think that is just fascinating. Having levels in a game that are like secret bonus levels and having that hidden nature, but the only reason this is the case is because people by their nature actively avoid them. Just think about that for a second. Anyway, to complete all stages would be a true achievement, but you know what would be even more of an achievement? Collecting every gem. That's right, the game does keep a record of every gem you have collected, and at the end of the game, it tells you how many gems you collect out of a total of 3001. There is also some text at the end telling you all about the process of making the game and that you should look forward to the sequel, if only it actually existed. My main point here is that no matter how good you are at this game, there is still a fun, challenging game to be had. This game is so open to a range of different skill levels, and it does all this without difficulty selection. Everything is presented in the game whilst you play it. And despite all of this, the game still follows a very simple concept, which is collect the gems and get to the end. So, do I recommend that you play this game? Absolutely, 100%. But one thing that I must say is that please do not use save states. The essence of this game is all about practicing. It's about mapping out the game in your mind and projecting your knowledge that you've acquired into your performance on the game. With save states, all you would be doing is mastering one level at a time, forgetting it the moment you passed it. And Tearaway Thomas is not about that. Tearaway Thomas isn't a series of individual challenges. The game itself is its own challenge. Gem perfecting and star skips are all part of the bigger picture, and with save stating you just can't appreciate that big picture. So please try out this game and don't use save states. And happy gem collecting!